now call Glendon Goh of Hwa Chong Institution to continue the proposition's case.
Demand is the key issue in today's debate. Our economy has seen a drop in both consumer spending and our productive capabilities. And as the Ministry of Finance, we will implement measures to tackle both at the same time. For not doing so, will result in ineffective policy. On the other hand, on their side of the house, however, we see that their policy fails to address the demand side of the problem. Their policy only focuses on creating jobs and increasing GST and fails to directly stimulate the economy by increasing domestic spending. And I will deal with this in my one main point of contention today, on which side of the house better deals with the problem that we face today. So now, they've leveled 3 claims against our policy. Firstly, that our policy is not sustainable. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our policy is definitely not going to take place in the long term, unlike what they have told us today. Cash handouts are not meant to be distributed over a 10-year period, ladies and gentlemen. They're only meant to be distributed within this short time period, within the period of the economic recession. No, thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister of Finance has already stated in his budget speech, that $2.6 billion will be earmarked for this, and $2.6 billion only. There isn't going to be a significant tenfold increase in spending on cash handouts. Now, on the second claim that they level on us, that consumers, given these cash handouts, would rather save than spend. Now, my first speaker has already given you 3 broad reasons why consumers are going to spend rather than save this money. The first reason is that consumers have entrenched lifestyles that they are unable to keep up with because of this economic recession. And in order to keep up with these lifestyles, they need disposable income. They need consumer confidence, which is what our policy of cash handouts effectively gives them. Now, he has also talked to you about the whole idea of saving, that because of low interest rates, because of the already high saving rates of Singaporeans, the marginal utility of further savings is going to be compromised, and therefore people are far less likely to save in this time. Thank you, sir. Now, finally, my first speaker has also talked to you about how people are more likely to spend this money or invest this money simply because times are bad, inflation is going down, and goods are much cheaper today than before, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, because it makes economic sense for consumers to spend, hold on a moment, sir. Because of this, ladies and gentlemen, we see that consumers are far more likely to save than to spend the money, than to save the money. Yes, sir.
So your primary reason behind people spending money was that they had to keep up with lifestyles they previously had. We tell you in the current economic climate, these lifestyles are not viable. It is not up to the government to help them maintain unsustainable lifestyles.
So we tell you that these lifestyles are by all means sustainable. You cannot expect a middle-class family to suddenly live the life of a pauper overnight, ladies and gentlemen. What we say is that because of these cash handouts, consumers will be more motivated to spend, and this spending should be supported by the government simply because it stimulates our economy. We see that domestic demand, because exports are contracting, because we cannot rely on global demand to sustain our economy, domestic demand has to step in. Our government, our budget has to deal with domestic demand. And finally, let's take a look at their policy. Now, their policy of GST cuts, let's reintroduce you this simple statistic that 75% of our GST is paid by the top 40% of income earners in Singapore. These top 40% income earners in Singapore are barely affected by this economic crisis. They are not going to cut their spending very much. What we propose, what we support today is a progressive cash handout, where people, where the middle and lower classes get more income, get more money than those in the upper classes, simply because this is where the money is needed, and these are the people who are going to cut their spending most. So having dealt with that, on the other part of their policy, the job retraining programs and the business assistance measures. Now, in essence, these measures only deal with the supply side of the problem. They maintain the supply chain, but they do not generate consumer demand. And I will go on to show this in my point of substantive later. So, having shown you why our policy clearly stimulates demand and solves the problem more than the opposition's, let me move on to my substantive on the whole idea of complementarity. Now, the economy relies on both demand and supply to sustain itself, and our ministry needs to tackle both these interdependent forces. Now, we spend $2.6 billion on the jobs credit scheme trying to save our jobs. But is this going to be effective if companies are going to employ workers that are made redundant simply because there's no demand? We tell you no. We tell you that this policy cannot stand alone. We are out of order, sir. Now, furthermore, we see that simply put, these business assistance measures, these job retraining schemes, cannot keep jobs, companies, and banks afloat indefinitely if there's no demand. And our policy of cash handouts provide these companies with the demand that they need and enhance the efficacy of these measures in total. Now, as such, ladies and gentlemen, outside the House stands for cash handouts. Go with the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Glendon. The Speaker spoke for 5 minutes and 19 seconds. I now call Nicolette Tan of Liang Girls High School to advance the opposition's case.
Now, the government has told us today that our policy does not increase domestic demand. So let's take them on that. They want us to increase domestic demand. They want us to help. And on our side, we want to help business able to cut costs and taxpayers to survive in this recession. So firstly, let us talk about domestic demand. Now, they tell us that domestic demand is low, and we agree. In fact, it is it's a lower percentage of our revenue as compared to what businesses earn. So they tell us that with cash handouts, people will in fact have more incentive to spend. But however, we tell them that is not true. No, thank you, sir. As we have seen in the 1997 economic recession, that people were more likely to save rather than spend. And when people actually hoard money, this means that the money that you give out to the people is not coming back into the economy. We're not stimulating economic growth, and as a result, the government actually earns less revenue in the process, and ultimately, who suffers? The taxpayer suffers. We suffer because we have to pay more taxes to actually keep up with government revenue. So, and also we want to actually say that no matter how much you help to increase domestic demand, we tell you that all this monetary circulation is actually only going to occur within your country. No, thank you, sir. And as we've proven, with people actually hoarding money, when people keep up their saving rates, when people save more, then this circulation is not really going to happen. We tell you that it is in fact imperative to actually introduce global demand and support foreign trade and industry. No, thank you, ma'am. And if we tell you that, and you tell us about people's entrenched lifestyles. Now, actually, the way we want to talk about people's lifestyles is that if people have already been able to cut down to a more economically viable lifestyle in this economic recession, then why not keep it up? We tell you that these people, no thank you, sir, will not in fact relax their expenditure because this recession is unpredictable. People want to continue to save for a rainy day. So this further proves the point on how people will save the money, and in the end, our economy is not being stimulated. No thank you, ma'am. So, on the other hand, in fact, GST increases local demand because people are only helped when they spend. So the money that you're actually supposedly compromising when you cut down the GST does actually come back when the people continue to spend. And we tell you that, no thank you, sir, that there's this sale mentality. Now everyone loves a sale. And when you go to a sale, you are faced with that immediate discount. And you are likely to spend more. That is the mentality of the average Singaporean, which they can't seem to grasp. So we tell you that GST will in fact actually encourage people to spend more in this economic recession. And now they tell us that 40% of our people pay 75% of the GST, and we tell you that this 40% is going to be the people who stimulate our economy, is going to increase domestic demand. So now, on the other hand, we want to help businesses, and they tell us that, well, this is only one side of the picture. But we tell you that when businesses are allowed to cut costs, hold on a moment, sir, then more people, they have the flexibility to hire more people in line with the jobs credit scheme, and people will have a higher sustainable income. And when people have a higher sustainable income, they will be able to contribute back to our economy. Yes, sir.
Show us why people will have the incentive to save, but the marginal utility of even further savings is already diminishing. And moreover, is a time where people need to spend. People are cutting back even normal goods and basic necessities, which are produced locally, madam.
Now, sir, we tell you that in this recession, before the budget speech has come out, people have already been cutting back on their lifestyles. People, instead of buying 2 bags of rice a week, they might buy 2 bags of rice a month. They might buy 1 bag of rice, and they are not really cutting down on their essential goods, but rather they are cutting down on excessive spending. And this excessive spending will continue to be cut down on, and we don't see why people will not save more money in this rainy day. So let me move on quickly to my substantive. Then on how, no thank you, sir, cash handouts in fact undermine the idea of meritocracy. Now, we all know that the Singaporean government encourages meritocracy, which is that the person's progress is determined by the person's merit. And cash handouts, in fact, undermine this because, no thank you, sir, it creates over-reliance. Now, we show you precedents in the UK and Finland where large percentage of the budget are actually supporting individuals in perfect health and can actually go look for a job, but are given cash handouts. And in fact, 62% of the US 2008 budget was spent on these social entitlements. And we tell you that this will create over-reliance on the people's part because this number is actually increasing in the US and it will exacerbate economic situation and not stimulate growth in the economy. As businesses and taxpayers, what we want is for taxes to decrease, like the reduction in corporate tax by 1% from 18% to 17%. As I have mentioned, when we reduce the taxes of the government, of the businesses, then they can cut down on costs. Foreign investors will be more likely to come and spend in our local economy because they can spend on a lower cost. And when there's sustainable employment for businesses in Singapore, then funds can be better used to promote meritocracy, such as retraining programs like my partner has mentioned. So ultimately, we tell you with retraining and GST cuts is the best way to increase domestic demand and increase business supply. Therefore, we tell you, go with the taxpayers.
Thank you, Nicolette. The speaker spoke for 5 minutes and 14 seconds. I now call Minerva Lim of Methodist Girls' School.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, today we have heard already from our opening government why distributing cash handouts helps to stimulate growth. Now, clearly, their case focuses more on the monetary aspect, ladies and gentlemen. What we as closing government propose to do in our extension today is how such a monetary necessity of growth should be balanced in proportion with the moral obligations and imperatives that a government has towards its people, specifically the disenfranchised, ladies and gentlemen, such as the lower income groups and the unemployed. And we think that these equitable duties towards its people are an equal facet of the country's growth. Let's see how in my 3 points of contention. Firstly, on the whole idea of the policies brought about by the opposition. Secondly, on the whole idea of saving versus spending. And thirdly, on their whole idea of over-reliance. Now, moving on to my first point, on the policies that they brought up. Now, today they've already told us several ideas that they want to put in. For example, the retraining programs that they say will promote sustainable job creation. Now, we see that, ladies and gentlemen, today what they have failed to ignore is that these retraining programs will take lots of time. And what we see is that the need that we need to address in our cash handouts today is immediate. We need to address this now. The people in the people that we are targeting, the low-income groups, they are suffering, ladies and gentlemen. They have difficulty paying water bills. They have difficulty sending their children to school. And this is what we need to do. We need to address their problem now, not just give retraining programs. And they have also proposed GST cuts. But we say these are ineffective, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you, madam. Because we say that today it is the rich that spend more, ladies and gentlemen, rather than the poor. And we say that today, when we do have GST cuts is that we actually benefit the rich more than the poor. What we see is that today the poor cannot afford to spend anymore. And so what we see is that these policies actually are not geared towards the lower income groups. No, thank you, sir.
Madam.
No, thank you, madam. Now, moving on to my second point of contention, on the whole idea of saving versus spending. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we see that these poor people in the first place need the money. They are not going to be able to hoard it in a bank and keep it for a rainy day as they have proposed to us, because these people need it now. They need to buy the basic necessities that they need. They need to be able to continue to live. But even if we say that they do decide to save in a bank, no thank you, madam, we say that these savings will eventually return to the economy, and this will support local industries as the banks will have increased liquidity to lend out to people. And no thank you. And so we say that the poor today are unable to cut down on spending, and this will eventually lead to detrimental effects. No thank you, madam. Now let's look at the third point of contention for today, on the whole idea of over-reliance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at what we are proposing today. Now, we are not going to give cash handouts to every single poor income person for the rest of their lives. Now, we say that these cash handouts are a one-time thing. They are not going to be continually given every single year or anything like that. And we say that this is a short-term solution, but what we see is that this addresses the immediate need. And so we say that people in the end, no thank you, sir, they still need to work, because the $800 that they're going to be given is not going to be enough to support them and support their daily lives. And so we don't really see how their whole idea of over-reliance comes about. No thank you, sir. So let's move on to my substantive today, that on the whole idea of moral imperative. So let's take a look at Singapore's demographic makeup. The lower income group amounts to almost 21% of the population. These people suffer from economic impoverishment daily. They have difficulty feeding their families of 3 or 4. Most have to scrimp and save just to pay their water and electricity bills at the end of the month, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you, madam. And so by distributing cash handouts to these people, we fulfill the moral obligation of a government to assist its people. And this is even more important because these people are the most disenfranchised in our society today. And we see today that society's progress is not simply measured by how well we treat our upper class, but by how we care for the impoverished. And that is a true mark of a democracy, whereby both growth and equity take place in tandem. We see the state philosophy, hold on a minute, sir, of equitable growth present in other policies as well. Yes, sir.
Madam, I think if you want to really fulfill your role to the low-income groups, you would boost policies such as the financial assistance
you,
which you already have.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have already told you how these policies, they are first of all not mutually exclusive to our own policy. And second of all, we say that our policy, as I already told you in my rebuttals, best addresses this problem from the root. Now, moving back to my case, state hospitals use means testing and subsidies to aid less affluent patients. Clearly, the poorer segment in society already receives extra attention from the state. And again, the government's duty is not just to prioritize economic growth, but to apportion it with a moral imperative to assist the most vulnerable. Therefore, this provides a balance between state obligations and economic growth. Now, moving on to my second idea, that on the whole idea of how society wants to move away from bare minimum standard of living into one which provides a relatively more comfortable way of life. And this is because by providing them immediate monetary relief, we allow them to spend on important necessities on a day-to-day basis. This is essential for their livelihood. For example, we are talking about diapers that babies need, ladies and gentlemen, milk powder for protein and growth, and fruits to provide vitamins. And so we see this is how society progresses when we shift away from this and we become a society where the people are more well accounted for. So let's go with the proposition.
Thank you, Minerva. The speaker spoke for 5 minutes and 13 seconds.